And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Ryan Metzler.
Hey everybody, it's Ryan Metzler here again, and today we're going to check out a city building or city zoning or an area building or whatever you want to call it game. It's going to be Urbanization from Queen Games. A game for 2 to 4 players in which players are going to be trying to acquire parcels of land, build things on those parcels of land, get enough food and resources and buildings in order to establish a civilization and have civilians in their area in order to earn victory points, but still having enough resources over to potentially earn some bonus. So real quick, why don't we take a look at what you get inside of this box and how the game plays, and then I'll come back here and give you my final thoughts on Urbanization. So here you can see a 4-player setup for Urbanization. If this were a fewer player game, we'd cover up some of these land spaces with these diamond-shaped tiles they've included to make the play area smaller for fewer players. So these exist, they're there. I'm not going to talk about them any further. At the beginning of the game, each of these spaces will actually be covered by one of these price markers. And in player order at the start of the game, you have the choice of choosing one of these areas to start your game on, paying for it, which costs $1 for each price marker there, and placing one of your action markers and a house on that spot. So you'll see here that each player has chosen where they'd like to start, and then when they buy the spot, they move the price markers that are there to a different area on the board that contains at least one price marker. For example, you can see this spot here has 2 price markers on it. It's been made more expensive by somebody moving a price marker from one area to another when they bought it. In addition, everybody's going to have some action markers. They're going to have, of course, their price or their score marker, and they're going to have some indicators on their own little player sheet here. This one shows how many citizens they have, 1. It shows how many houses they have, 1. How much food they have, how many of each different resource they have, and of course, if they may tax or not. And we'll cover all of that shortly. So at the start of the game, you have various different areas for holding tokens, you have areas for factories, you have some money, and each player will start with some money, of course. That's this nice cardboardish paper money. And then you have several markers around the board to denote various other things. On the first turn of the game, the player who is the start player is going to choose one card to dictate what their role is for that turn. And you'll see there's all these different roles. There are 9 to choose from, and a 10th one that is awarded at the beginning of the second turn to whoever happens to be losing the game. And that player will become the mayor and the first player. So we can see here the farmer that says you may sow 1 or 2 seeds onto the farmer card. And when you do this, these are going to produce more grain for you to use for food later in the game. So this is kind of like having open building spots on the board, but using them on this card instead. Or you have the real estate broker who can allow you to change the price of 2 different pieces of land to swap those prices and make maybe the one you want to buy cheaper and a different one more expensive. Or you have the foreman here that says when you receive work orders, you actually get double the amount of resources for doing so once on a turn. So depending on which one of these you choose at the start of each turn, it's going to kind of dictate the bonus you get for that turn. After you've selected that, you're going to move on to taking actions. And each turn of the game, of which there are 6, you will get to take 4 actions. And each player will take 1 action before they take another action around the table. So there's so many different actions. There's 8 of them, and I'm going to cover them very quickly. The 8 actions are as follows. You may buy new land. So for example, let's say it's the green player's turn. He can buy any piece of land he's already adjacent to, which limits him to this one, and this one. They're all priced 1, so maybe he decides he wants to move this way to interfere with black. He would pay $1, he would remove this token, and he would place one of his action markers on that spot. So now he owns 2 parcels of land with 3 building spots, one of which is covered by a house. He would then move this token somewhere else, maybe increasing the price of another parcel of land. Maybe he doesn't plan on expanding this way, and he wants to make things a little bit harder for red. So he places that over there, and now that parcel of land will cost $3. The next possible action is that you may go ahead and build buildings. And there are 3 types of buildings you can build. You can build houses, skyscrapers, and you may build corporate buildings, which look like this. So when you build these, you're going to be paying money and earning victory points, but you have to have open parcels of land. A house costs you $2 from your supply, and you can build it on any open parcel of land where you have a building spot, and it will get you 1 victory point, which you'll mark on the track. If you want to build a skyscraper, which are going to be a little bit taller buildings, they actually look like this, you have to have a house to replace, and it'll cost you $3, but it'll earn you 2 victory points, and it'll go on the same place. So you're going to replace a house with a skyscraper and earn some extra points. In addition, every time you build a house or a skyscraper, you're going to move up your house track 1 with your little citizen here. And that's going to track how many places you have for people to live, which is going to denote how many citizens you get later in the game. The third type of building are the corporate buildings, and these do not require a space on your board, which is why you build them, but they also do not increase your housing. You may pay $3 and earn 2 victory points and place this on any of your plots of land that doesn't already have one, and that's another way to earn victory points by simply spending money. The next option is that you may trade grain, and that involves either buying or selling grain from the board, and you'll see we have several different areas for grain. Each one of these you can buy 1 grain from, so if I wanted to buy 4 grain, I would pay $1 and another $1, 2 more dollars and 2 more dollars for a total of $6 for 4 grain. I may also buy from the field up top here and pay 1 more, and I would pay another $3 for that grain. So that's where you can buy grain from. If you want to sell grain, you always sell right to left as well. So you're going to sell cheapest first and fill that area 1 grain per player before you move on to selling at the next area in order to get some extra cash. When you buy that grain, you're going to place it onto your board, and you're going to keep track of how many grain you have. So you'll see there's a track for grain, and there's a track for resources below that. With your grain, as an action, you may sow grain onto empty building spaces you have on your board. So, if green happen to have 2 grain, they could take a sow grain action to sow grain on each of their empty building spaces. And at the end of the turn, this will provide them with an extra grain from the supply for each grain that they've sown, giving them more food for their people. The next action you can do is receiving work orders, and this will require you to use your action markers. So you have a limited supply of these action markers. You may place them out on any of the factories that are available up at the top. Each factory has several spaces on it, and you'll see they have icons on them that show you what they give you. The first 2 spaces in this one provide you with 2 of the orange resource. So when you place an action marker on here, you will take 2 of the orange resource and place them on your track down here. The next space does the same thing, while the third space is slightly different and will be covered in a moment. Different factories provide different resources. So you'll see this one here provides you with gray instead of with orange. So it gives you a slightly more expensive resource, but only gives you 1 of them. Whereas future ones will provide you with even more. For example, this one here that I just dropped provides you with white resources and even more white resources if you wait a little bit longer. But you have to place left to right, so you can't go ahead and jump forward and take one of the better actions. The next action is also related to these factories and allows you to go ahead and take one of the factories as long as the other 2 spaces on these factories are full. So if other players have placed on these 2 spots and filled them up, you may place on the 3rd spot in order to buy this factory. And when you do, you're going to take the factory and you'll place it in front of yourself, and you'll have to place a factory out onto the board. So you're going to take one of the factory markers, which are actually these ones right here, and place it out onto an empty building space on the board somewhere in one of your areas. This action will earn you 2 victory points and the ability to produce goods at that factory later. If you do not have space for the factory, you may overbuild one of your previous factories as long as the number of the factory that you're taking is higher than the number of the factory that you have. So for example, if I were to take this 3 later, and I already had the 1 factory, I could overbuild my 1 factory, making the 3 factory active, and scoring points for that one, and having a bonus at the end of the game for having both of them. The second to last action option is, or I guess it's third to last, is producing goods. And when you produce goods, you're going to be able to take goods that you've gotten on your supply by taking these actions from the factories. So for example, if I'd taken a gray earlier, and I had that gray off on my supply board, I would be able to produce goods by placing that good onto the factory. It shows here what the factory produces, 1 gray, and so I would move that gray onto here, and I would get $2 for that action as well as a victory point for doing that. So you'll see that when you produce goods, it's going to give you money, and it's also going to provide you victory points throughout the game. Now the second to last action is collecting taxes. And when you collect taxes, you're going to be able to move your marker down 1 space on the board, your taxes marker, as long as it's to the right of your citizen marker. What this will do is allow you to get $1 from the bank for each citizen you have in your village. So you start the game with 1, it would get you $1. And maybe you could use that dollar to build something or to buy some grain that you need to feed your people later. Whatever it is, maybe you need to get some more money real quick, and that's a fast way of doing that. Now the final action is actually an expansion action. It's not included in the base game, so I've shown you everything in the base game right now. But the final action is one from an expansion, and it's called Invention. And it involves these cards that I've set off to the side. These are invention cards. On your turn, instead of doing any of the things I told you previously, you may instead put one of your action markers on the spaces on the board, and then move them along for $1 each space you'd like to move. Now, above those, there are going to be these cards here, and you'll see on the board it tells you which card goes there. So, for example, 3 gold and 2 gray goes on this spot, or 3 orange and 2 white goes on that spot. And you'll see that these cards here all are numbered accordingly. So we have the steam engine here that says you may exchange 2 orange for 2 gray work orders during the factory's administration phase. So during that phase of the game, you can use this item in order to do that. And it also gives you a point at the end of the game if you have a sawmill. So each of these cards has a different invention on it that's going to be usable throughout the game as long as you decide to take it. And when you move along these spaces, wherever you land, you can take one of those cards and earn 1 victory point. So that is the inventions action, and it comes with a corresponding card for the roles here. We have the professor here who says you can take all available invention cards at a space that you dock on. So once you get there, instead of taking 1, you'll take all of them. So he makes that action a little bit better. Anyhow, at the end of the round, you're going to go through some upkeep phases, and the upkeep phases are as follows. First thing you're going to do is for each of the grain you sowed onto the board, if you have a grain out in an empty building space, you're going to go ahead and you're going to harvest that grain and get an extra grain from the supply for it, placing them on your board. The lowest numbered remaining factory at the top is going to get removed from the game, and then you're going to refill all of the positions on the board with the remaining factories in order to have new factories available for the next turn. After that, you're going to determine how many citizens you have, and determination of citizens is going to be based on what you have on your board. For each building you have, you're going to take a look at your buildings, you're going to take a look at your food supply, and you're going to take a look at how many work resources you have. From those, the lowest number is going to determine what your citizen number is. So for example, let's say we have 3 food, we have 3 housing spaces, but we only have 1 working resource. That would determine that our citizens are 1. After that, we're going to have to pay 1 resource for each, or 1 food resource for each of our citizens, and that's going to go back into this supply here. This will then let us see how many food resources we have left, and in that case we only have 2, but for every 3 we had on the board we would get 1 extra victory point. So having extra food is going to be worth victory points at the end of your turns. From there we're going to refill all of the grain on the board, and you're going to start refilling here, and you're going to look and see which areas are missing grain, and if there's more grain here than there are players, you're going to refill with all of the grain that's in this area. So we'd take a look, and right now none of them are empty except for 1, so we would refill area 1. But if there were empty spots on any of these other areas, we would start taking grain from there and refill down the line. After we refill, we're going to go ahead and advance the game turn, so we'd go to the second turn, and then we would go ahead and start the next round. And whoever was losing at this point would become the mayor. They would get a victory point immediately, and they would start the next round as the first player. And remember, before you move to the next round, you take 4 actions. So you're going to get your 4 actions, you're going to move from round to round, and hopefully you're going to accumulate victory points by best buying buildings, getting land areas, producing goods, and, of course, manipulating turn order in order to be the winner. Well, there you have it. That is Urbanization by Queen Games. What I would consider to be a light to medium light take on what is kind of area control by building your buildings out there, but also some resource management, and it definitely has that aspect of trying to build different things evenly. You need to have enough food, you need to have enough resources, you need to have enough land in order to have enough buildings, in order to get citizens, and so forth and so on. So it's got that definite aspect to it, and I think there's a lot going on. It's just not in a very complex manner. I do like the fact that they've included the scaling so that it scales the board down, and that's always a nice touch. I just don't think that there's enough decision going on in terms of things that I think are not obvious. So I feel like it's always obvious what I have to do on my turn. And while this is not a bad thing for a lighter game, I'm looking for more intricate decisions, more evolved and advanced decisions that are going to be kind of outside the scope of the obvious at times, and I don't think that Urbanization provides that to me. Now, I still think that there's a crowd for this game, people who just prefer a lighter social activity, people who are looking for something with options, but not an excessive amount of options. I think Urbanization is definitely a good selection and a good gateway into games like this. So if that sounds interesting to you, check out Urbanization from Queen Games.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.